Now, we might expect that the Gospels contain a lot of similar material. After all, they are all writing about the life, ministry, and death of Jesus. However, 3 of them contain a lot of very similar material. In fact, they are so similar in places that if there were 3 essays, a teacher marking them would have very little option than to suspect one or more of them of copying. It is because of this similarity that they are called the Synoptic Gospels. That's a term first used by an 18th century German biblical scholar called Johann Jakob Griesbach. More on him later. The synoptic problem is really the detective story that tries to work out who the guilty parties are, who copied from whom. Or, to put it another way, who wrote their Gospels first, which would leave the other Gospels as suspects of copying. The synoptic problem therefore places each of the synoptic Gospels on trial. So, talking of which,
this court is now in session. The Honourable Judge Good is presiding. The court will now hear the case for the prosecution. Is the prosecution ready to make their case?
Yes, Your Honour.
What is your complaint?
There is plagiarism being undertaken by the authors of Matthew, Mark and Luke. Despite the expected commonality between the Gospels, there is evidence of collusion. If I refer the court to Exhibit A, it can be seen that 76%, that is over 3/4 of Mark, can also be found in Luke and Matthew. This means that 600 of the 661 verses in Mark's Gospel, that is roughly 90%, are also found in Matthew.
Objection, Your Honour. Surely it is known that the ministry of Jesus was circulated orally at the time.
What does the prosecution have to say about this objection?
If it would please the court, may I refer to Exhibit B? The prosecution is not denying the significance of an oral tradition. However, here it can be seen that there is exact literary correlation. Matthew, Mark and Luke are verbatim. It is extremely unlikely that this would have occurred through oral transmission. As we can see from John, who also refers to this same event, his wording is completely different, even down to the word he uses for fish. This is strongly suggestive of a literary dependency of a plagiaristic nature. Their similarities do not end there. If I can refer the court to Exhibit C, the triple tradition material that appears in all 3 of the Gospels appears in a strikingly similar order. This is not just found in the broad structure of the books, detailed in Exhibit C, but also down to the basic structure of the individual incidents or pericope. This strongly suggests some form of literary complicity. This material, appearing in Matthew, Mark and Luke, is known as triple tradition, and because of the close literary parallels between them, would the court accept them being termed as the Synoptic Gospels, meaning that they can be seen together?
The term synoptic is duly accepted by the court. Is there anything further that the prosecution would like to add before the defence is called?
Yes, Your Honour. I would like to refer the court to Exhibit D. There appears to be an even closer literary relationship between some material that is found in both Matthew and Luke, but not in Mark. Large blocks of text with only very small alterations in wording suggest plagiarism on a more audacious scale. This material, some 200 verses in all, is found exclusively in Matthew and Luke and is called double tradition. Would the court accept that there is a case to be answered?
The court finds that there is a case to answer. However, the prosecution has yet to establish who is guilty of plagiarism.
here is a good place to conclude our first part of the Synoptic Gospels on trial. During this presentation, we have looked at evidence that's been put forward to substantiate some kind of literary link or relationship between three of the Gospels that we find in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark and Luke. This evidence has included triple tradition, that is material that is in common to all three Gospels. We've also looked at double tradition, that is material that's common between Matthew and Luke. And finally, we have looked at the ordering that Matthew, Mark and Luke share. And this has led scholars to conclude that there is some sort of literary relationship between the Synoptic Gospels, or Matthew, Mark and Luke. One of the most common mistakes made by students when dealing with the synoptic problem, and in fact it's a fairly widespread misconception, is to think that the synoptic problem is all about the differences in the Gospels. And it's only concerned with when one Gospel says one thing and another Gospel says another, and who's telling the truth and which is right and which is wrong and is one lying and all the rest of these arguments. As we have seen, the synoptic problem rests not on the differences but on the similarities. It's the similarities that the synoptic problem is based on. And then, having established and seen these similarities, then the differences are thrown into sharp relief. Having substantiated a case that perhaps one or more of the Gospel writers were copying, we now need to find out who the guilty party or parties are. And that will be looked at in our second presentation, The Synoptic Gospels on Trial, Part 2. Thank you.